Afternoon and welcome to the second Snapolitic kind of YouTube podcast that I've decided to do. Today I want to speak about the future of Lib Dems. Kind of a word of note beforehand, I did join the Lib Dems in summer, so I'm one of the kind of glut of new members that they have. And I thought a good person to speak to would be Mike Green, who's a Lib Dem member and activist in York. So, Mike, would you want to introduce yourself, if that's okay?
Hello, I am Mike Green. I have been a member of the Lib Dem since 2010. I joined ever so slightly late for Cleggmania. I joined just after the coalition government was announced. So one of the ones who was actually attracted to the idea of being in government rather than being repulsed by it. So. And now I am the chair of the University of York Lib Dems. So that's me.
Cool. Thanks, Mike. It's nice that some people actually like the idea of governing, which everyone seems to be really negative about that, which is I find quite weird, but there you go.
Yeah, well, I was a supporter during the election, but I actually did hold off becoming a member until we'd sort of proven we could do it, because I didn't want to be a member of a protest party.
Yeah. It's quite noble in a way joining after kind of May 2010, because you've kind of missed the optimistic bit, and then it's just been everyone kind of saying we're not doing enough in government, and then we've lost a lot. So I kind of get that, especially as someone who joined after May 2015. I kind of joined at the most depressing point for the Lib Dems, so I can completely get that, to be honest.
Well, the massive membership surge was a much needed cause for optimism, because after the election itself, it was a depressing night. I'm not going to deny it. I mean, seeing so many great figures of the party lose their seats, from Vince Cable, Simon Hughes to David Laws and Danny, and then two things happened. One, we had the surge of members, and then also the next day we had the results of the local election in York, where we actually made a lot of gains. It was one of the few places in the country where we did quite well. So there's two much needed boosts to
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, living quite close to York was, I remember being up late at night watching everything, and it was a bit like hearing that song "Let the Bodies Hit the Floor." There was just like carnage happening for most kind of parties, and especially the Lib Dems. And yeah, York was this little beacon of liberalism, which was quite nice to see, shall I say? So hopefully that keeps up. That'd be good to see.
well, yeah.
Sorry, Mike. So yeah, the first thing I was going to ask you actually is I know before we started broadcasting live, you said you'd gone to conference, and I haven't been yet. I was kind of a lazy Lib Dem who couldn't make it this time, but I'm hoping to go to the spring conference in York. So I just wondered if you could just quickly sum up how you found conference. I've never done one of these, so quite interesting to hear.
Well, you're certainly not lazy if you don't want to spend. It's not lazy if you not want to spend 6 hours on a train. Trust me on that. Both
Fair
ways as well. Both there, 6 hours there and 6 hours back. It was a really enjoyable conference. It was quite optimistic, considering the circumstances. It was completely packed. It was the largest conference we've had. It was, I think, 2,500 new members. 2,500 people at conference, including several hundred new members.
That's good. So, that's really good.
Yeah, it was a really good time. I spoke for the first time at conference.
All right. What did you speak on?
It was the geekiest debate. It was the most Lib Demi debate you have ever watched. It was a constitutional amendment on the deputy leadership that ended up going to a counted vote on a procedural motion to refer back the constitutional amendment. That's how.
No, that is pretty technical and arcane. I'm not gonna lie.
It was quite scary. I'm not gonna lie, but it was good to finally speak on something. I had also prepared a speech for the Trident debate, which I didn't expect to be called up on at all. I'm nowhere near important enough to speak on a debate where they had literally something like 6 hours worth of speakers cards. But yeah, it did. How scary it sort of was to go up there on stage and speak, sort of makes me relieved that I wasn't called in the Trident debate, because that would have been terrifying.
Fair one, fair one. I mean, on both those points, I mean, I do think it takes a lot of balls, because I know I was watching on the BBC News, and I don't think when you watch things on TV, you get a sense of the scale of the place when you speak into that number of people, if that makes sense. It's not very representative of like how daunting it can be. So I can understand that. And then on Trident, like I said to you before we started, I'm really kind of fucking relieved that the Lib Dems didn't back kind of unilateral disarmaments or anything like that. It was a nice relief, I think.
I agreed, and as I was saying to you before, I mean, Tim threw basically every senior figure in the Lib Dems at that amendment. Kirsty Williams, Willie Rennie, Simon Hughes, Shirley Williams, basically everyone you could think of was as a senior member of the party was in that debate at some point. It was quite an impressive one. And then on the other side, they had like Julian Huppert and Tessa Munt. So
yeah, it was generally a good debate though. Like I thought there were some good points on both sides. I didn't think it was like rubbish, if you know what I mean. There was some quite nuanced points.
It was a high quality debate, and it was a good example of the internal democracy of the party. Just the tension in the hall when the vote was actually held, it was there have been very few moments in sort of my political life which have been like that. It was extraordinary. But
good. No, I'm a bit jealous in a way, because I did like that one. It looked really good. So I guess my first question to you, moving on. Although actually, one more thing about conference. Now I think about it, what did you think of Tim's speech? Because I really liked Tim Farron's speech. I thought it was pretty kind of, good leader's speech as leader speeches go.
I thought it was a good speech. I thought that it sort of followed the sort of like Tim's sort of standard style, where he tends to build up as the speech goes on and then ends on a sort of crescendo. The same with his like first speech when his leadership got announced.
Yeah.
So it was I thought it was a very good speech. I was happy with it. It got reported on well, was my understanding. I mean,
yeah, that's where I picked up. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, it's a bit weird at conference because it's like the epicenter, and so you don't actually get as much access to the media as you do outside of it, if you get what I mean. Because
it's like a goldfish bowl, isn't it?
Yeah, you are. I mean, you obviously hear about some of it, like I heard about Piggate and everything. But it is you're so busy for quite a lot of the time, and your only access to the internet is your mobile phone and what have you. So it is a bit of a goldfish bowl. So, but from what I hear, it was reported on well.
Yeah, that was the sense I got, and I guess on a personal level, I was somewhat relieved, as I'm not with these people. I'm definitely not making snap judgments, but there were a few points over the summer where I had a few wobbles regards voting for Tim, because I personally saw my kind of policy-wise being more towards Norman Lamb. But I kind of voted for Tim in the end just because I thought he would be able to like speak in a passionate way. It was kind of a very pragmatic vote in the end. I thought if you've only got 8 MPs and you're not going to have a lot of time with the media, I think Tim might get his foot in the door more, so I'll vote for him, which... I'm sort of more relieved I've done that now. I think he proved to me in that speech he can do that.
Yeah, I thought I was actually very similar. I probably do agree more on policy issues with Norman, and it's sort of one of the freedoms you have as being in the Lib Dems in comparison to being in Labour or the Tories. It's that actually the leaders' policy positions aren't the most important thing in the world, because policy is made by conference. So I don't agree with Tim on fracking, for example, but Tim doesn't get to set our policy on fracking. It is set by conference and set by a democratic vote of the party members. So it's you don't need to agree with who you're voting for totally when it comes to Lib Dem leadership, which is quite a nice relief, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, picking up on one point you did mention regards deputy. Does that mean we're having a deputy leader now? Is that the case? Is that what's happening with that motion?
It's been referred back to the Governance Commission to basically come up with proposals that work.
Fair enough.
I mean, as I said on speech, I'm totally in favour of the principle of having a deputy leader elected by the entire party, but the constitutional amendment as it was just frankly wasn't good enough. it was quite a, and you can watch the debate. Numerous people make different points. I was making a point about how the role of the deputy leader was not explicit. It was not laid out at all. So yeah, hopefully that will come back at a future conference with a workable amendment that I can vote for. Because as I said, I agree with it on principle. But
Cool. No, I see no reason not to have a good kind of good strong role for a deputy leader. There's no reason why not to in my eyes. I guess first a broad question, Mike, which was, where do you see the Lib Dems now in terms of kind of our pragmatic electoral position within Parliament? And then where do you see us going? Kind of, I know, if we were trying to cast runes 3 or 4 years ago, the idea of kind of Labour losing Glasgow or a Tory majority would seem somewhat unlikely, I guess. But kind of if we try and cast the runes a few years ahead, where do you see things going for the Lib Dems? I know that's open, but hopefully we can narrow it down as we go.
Well, there are a few short-term goals. I mean, really, what the situation now reminds me of is after the merger we merged in 1988, and there was a massive row with David Owen and the Continuity SDP, and quite frankly, we're getting even lower in the polls than we got now. We're running at around 6% average. And we did worse in the 1989 European elections than the Greens did.
I remember hearing that. That's one of the Greens' kind of oft quoted facts, isn't it? That we beat the Lib Dems at some point in the late 80s, which I don't know. They seem to cling to that.
Well, it was because basically our party fell to pieces during the merger. And then Paddy Ashdown almost, I don't want to say single-handedly, but he did his leadership was magnificent in so many ways.
Yeah, I've got a lot of time for Paddy. I do really like the guy.
The best fringe I've ever been to was at this conference, and it was Paddy Ashdown and Shirley Williams talking about internationalism. It was hosted by Centre Forum, so hopefully they will put a YouTube video of it up on their page, because it was absolutely brilliant. It was.
I'd love to see that. I know, to link it back to the Trident debate, I really liked Shirley Williams' kind of contribution to that as well. Two people who've got just such kind of good minds on them, if you know what I mean. Kind of. I don't know how else to put it, but it's just I'm very, very impressed.
Yeah, it was great just seeing these two incredibly intelligent people talk about something they care about a lot, and just throwing in like historical and references to history and literature, just like it was nothing. It was almost poetic in its brilliance. Where was I? Talking about yes. So the path now is we need to make gains at the local elections next year. Definitely, we've lost around 2,000 councillors, I think 2,084 councillors since 2009. And we really do need to make gains again to build up local power bases once again. And the target, the proper target, is around 16 to 17% in the general elections, because that's when you start to get into the territory of having like a reasonable handful of winnable seats once again.
Yep.
The Europeans in 2019 will also be interesting, because we were basically just under the threshold to get a significant number of seats. As it happens, we only got one, Catherine Bearder in the southeast, which is mostly because the southeast is such a large region. It has so many MEPs that we sort of had to be represented. But if we wouldn't need to increase our vote share very much in 2019 to get around 5-6 MEPs again. So that's another. So those are my short-term targets. We need to start making gains in local elections. We need to. We want to get about 5-6 seats in the Europeans, and we need to get around 17% and then a handful of like 38 or so MPs in 2020. That's what I would set for Tim as his goals in the short term.
I think That's very self-explanatory, and I can kind of understand the trajectory to that. One of the things I'd say is regards 16-17% in a general election. I mean, do you think that's achievable in 2020? Am I being a pessimist, or is that do you think we can do that?
Well, I hope it's achievable. I think
Oh, absolutely.
Labour have certainly done us a great favour.
Yes.
Labour's election of Jeremy Corbyn has, I reckon, sort of brought back our recovery, has reduced our recovery time by 5 years. So we're looking at an increase of about 10%. Get some of that from Labour, some of that from the Conservatives. I mean, if you look at it, about 4% of our old vote went to the Tories, about 6% of it went to Labour in 2015 in comparison to the results in 2010. So yes, it's a matter of rowing back sort of our old mainstream vote, I think, and then also getting some people who are too demoralised to vote this time. That wouldn't be a particularly large amount. I mean, I quite like Philip Cowley's quote that basing an electoral strategy on winning non-voters is much like basing it on winning the dead.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, this is one of the things that I find absolutely baffling about the Corbyn kind of strategy is, this kind of we'll get people who can't be asked to vote. And there's the flip side to that as well, which is if you introduce someone who's very radically one way into the political system, you may also encourage people who don't want that to come out and vote. So,
well, that's what happened. That's what happened to with John Major, the shy Tory effect. Everyone thinks that radicalism is how you get non-voters to actually turn out. But the highest number of votes in the history of the British elections was for the most boring man in the history of British elections.
It's mad, isn't it?
John Major. He got over 11 million votes, and the reasoning was quite simple. People didn't much care for politics all that much. They didn't much care for John Major and the Conservatives personally, but they were threatened by Neil Kinnock still. And
well, this is it, and it ties in quite nicely to the kind of Corbyn myth that you can get loads of votes back from UKIP, because I mean, I just don't buy. You can show me as many polls as you want saying that UKIP people want rail nationalisation. I just don't buy that there's an overwhelming socialist contingent voting for UKIP.
Oh, I think that the election of Corbyn will be good for UKIP as well.
I agree.
Because because there are a lot of socially conservative Labour voters.
Yeah, and where do they go now?
Yeah, I mean, basically, the socially liberal Labour voters who are quite economically liberal, we get them, and the socially conservative Labour voters, UKIP gets them, because Corbyn is very socially liberal. I mean, he is pro-immigration. He won't sing the national anthem. I mean, I don't personally care that much about him not doing so, but quite a lot of Labour voters will do it. Indeed, I remember a quote about, I think it was from Sir Gerald Kaufman. I might be wrong on that, but he said he was in a pub when the Michael Foot was at the cenotaph. And he wore what was supposedly a donkey jacket. It wasn't actually a donkey jacket, but everyone thought it was a donkey jacket, and that was considered to be disrespectful. And he said that lost them more votes than any of the big campaign commitments, because people simply didn't think that he cared about the country, and it annoyed a lot of the socially conservative, working class Labour voters.
I agree. I mean, I think the big one, which if it were to happen, I think there was the mulling of Corbyn wearing a white poppy to the cenotaph, which, I mean, a lot of people around him dismiss, but from talking to people who live in kind of normal towns, quote unquote, who don't get that involved in politics, I think that would really piss a lot of people off.
It would almost definitely. And the problem here is that supposedly the people who are more in line with the working class, the people who supposedly know what on the left, who know what they're doing, they don't actually know the working class that well. They're mostly middle class graduates who once voted Green,
Yeah, which is
how you get this. which is how you get like the absurd idea of reopening the coal mines. No one in the north really wants the coal mines to reopen. What they want is decent, good quality jobs. And what they hate Thatcher for was that she basically shut down the industries with no replacement. They don't actually have so much of a nostalgia for the coal mines themselves. Indeed, a lot of working class parents did specifically work their arse off so that their kids could get a better job than being in the pits.
Yeah, I mean, I've got a grandparent who was a miner, and other kind of older relatives remember relatives who were miners, and the pretty constant theme was, I don't want any of my children to do this.
Yeah, and they just don't get that because, frankly, they're all from Islington coffee shops.
Yeah, exactly. And it's so yeah, that kind of thing is just absolutely preposterous. But I think it raises an interesting point that we've already started speaking about Corbyn, because one of the things I think we perhaps don't get psychologically yet in the Lib Dems is we still think we can kind of shape the political weather, or not shape it wholly, but we're going to be in some part be shaping it. And I don't know if there's necessarily a realization yet that with 8 MPs, it will literally be a case of, for a good amount of the time, reacting to events. So reacting to what's going on internally within Labour, reacting to how the Conservatives approach it are shaped by the EU referendum. I mean, does that make sense to you, Mike?
Yes. I think you are right. I think one addition I would make is that a lot of it will be shaping it at the local level. So going back to Joe Grimmond in the '60s and the what was then the Young Liberal movements in the '60s and community politics, and trying to set the agenda at a local level and building up local power bases, because that is it's much easier to get in a local newspaper than it is in a national newspaper, if you get what I mean. Of course, the latter is important too, but once you if you're participating in a local level, if you have candidates and activists talking to people, having stands, and winning elections again, then that's a good place of exposing people to the party. And once you get people to vote for the party locally, once you get people to think, oh, actually, these Lib Dems aren't such bad guys after all. They've fixed this road that was in tatters and what have you. Then they're much more willing to consider you at a national level.
Yeah, I mean, it's the old pothole strategy, I guess, isn't it? To be honest, kind of representing small local issues like the bus shelter or that kind of thing, which I think people get bored of quite quickly, but is actually quite relevant to building up a base. So I do agree with you there.
Yeah, it's not what most people consider glamorous, but it's important. I mean, if you are say a disabled person and your bus services are getting cut, then that's going to have a significant impact on your quality of life. So it is an incredibly important service, and it's about and it goes beyond just electoral gains as well. Community politics is basically about empowering the communities to be themselves political. It's not just an electoral strategy. But if you talk to Stuart about that, he can explain it much better than I can.
Yeah, well, that's a good question actually, because one of the things. So I've been trying to take more of an interest in the kind of not too glamorous bits of politics, because going from somebody who's very kind of layman-esque into it, like I don't know, I sort of followed politics like somebody would be a train spotter, and but then it's a niche thing that I like, and I just kind of spot them and try and interpret things as I go. But I guess what I'm trying to do now is understand how parties work, because I didn't understand, standing on the outside, how parties actually work. I thought I did, but I didn't. And then I'm trying to understand how parties kind of shape things, and a lot of that comes down to the whole local thing. And I guess for me, when we talk about community politics and people say it's about empowering communities, I've sort of, I get that. I get that on a kind of intellectual level, but I'm always a bit stumped to think what are examples of where people have empowered people, if you know what I mean. Like, what has that meant in actuality?
Well, a lot of it is just about getting people to participate at all. So where I'm from, it is a very safe conservative area. Where I'm originally from, very safe conservative area, and it's sort of an apolitical society because it is such a safe area. Indeed, we've had a Tory MP since the Great Reform Act. That's how safe, literally
So
since
he's going nowhere.
1832. So yeah, yeah, it's the same one. It's just this skeleton who gets occasionally wheeled out into the House of Commons. And again, safe Conservative council, safe Conservative ward. It's just, and what it results in is an apolitical society for the vast majority of people. For the vast majority of people, sort of the idea of a petition, of demanding stuff from your politicians, of expecting a decent level of engagement and service and involvement in politics, it's sort of not expected. It is if you are in a safe area, and this is why I mean, geeky area, but electoral reform is so important, because if you are in a safe area, you are not governing. You are not an active engagement in the act of governing. You are governed, and that's a distinction. The politicians, they do things to you, they do not do things in response to you. So that's what to me it's about. It's about getting people to be political animals, to expect a certain level of service, and to be part of the governing, not to be just the governed. And that's a very liberal principle, in my opinion.
I think those are really good points. I mean, to bring it back to kind of safe seats and electoral reform, I mean, electoral reform is one of the kind of reasons why I do support the Lib Dems. I mean, even at the last election, being in Selby, which is now quite a safe Conservative seat, it sounds terrible, and I'm slightly ashamed to kind of think like this, but I did get to a point where I thought, what is the point? Because I just know I know this vote will count for nothing nationally. And it's very depressing because especially when, I'm somebody in my group of friends who's more into politics, kind of how do I say to people it's really important you should vote when I know full well we're just going to get a Conservative MP come what may. So
Oh yeah, it's ridiculous. I mean, when I've got when I spoke on the House like several years ago, I was like, how is it justifiable that if you live here, you will have a Tory MP come what may at the election, but if you just go up down the 1079 and you live in Hull East, you will have a Labour MP no matter what happens at the election. It's completely unjustifiable, and it is. It makes the idea that we live in a democracy a bit of a sham. And I'm not ashamed to say that. Some people are like, oh, we shouldn't claim that, electoral reform really makes it as bad as to be undemocratic. But it does, because if your vote counts for nothing, then it's not a democratic system. But
yeah, no, I
yeah.
agree. I think one of the other good things, like you said, about kind of improving voter engagement and doing things at a local level is you do get these councils, don't you? This kind of stasis where, because it's kind of a monolithic council,
Oh
they
yeah,
just
one
can't
party
be
state.
challenged. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
I
I
mean,
mean, a good
Manchester.
example.
Manchester's best example of this. Every last seat is Labour. On 52% of the vote, every single seat in the council is Labour, and the effects of this are pretty predictable. There's corruption in these one-party states. There is a lack of accountability in these one-party states because, of course, why would there be accountability if every single? I mean, if you have like Ethiopia. It was Ethiopia recently where they had a national election and every single seat pretty much went to the ruling governing party. If that happens in another country's national level, we call it outrageous. If it happens in the town halls of one of our great cities, we just accept it as a fact of life. It's completely absurd.
Yeah, it is silly. And I mean, a good example I thought locally was perhaps Rotherham, which made the news, obviously.
Yes,
And,
yes.
just how, leaving aside the whole rabbit hole of what went on in Rotherham to kind of one second, I think any kind of situation that happened there would have been lessened if there'd have been more inquiry and critique at a local level.
Yes, I completely
I
agree.
don't see how that would not have helped. So, yeah, I think it's not necessarily that Labour are to blame. It's the fact that Labour are unopposed entirely that's to blame.
Well, yeah, you can. I mean, it's not. It's you can find the same situation for Conservative councils, and Not for many Lib Dem councils anymore, but once upon a time you could probably find the same thing for Lib Dem
I
councils.
guess he's human, isn't it? I guess people just get lazy, which sounds terrible.
Well, yeah.
But
Well, why? Even if you consider yourself sort of a good person, a person who tries to work for his community, who does put in all of the effort, self-critique tends not to be people's great points. You cannot be
absolutely.
accepted to do perfect self-critique. You need someone else from another political party, from another ideology, from another viewpoint to provide adequate critique.
It's all part of, I guess, the circle of life of politics, to be very cheesy about it. But yeah, I do think you need that yin and yang there. You do need opposition, which is one of the things kind of at a national scale, which I think is somewhat worrying, in that we don't really seem to have kind of, the Tories seem unopposed now, which is weird because they didn't really win by a substantial margin, and yet they seem to be, kind of dominant, which is a very strange situation now.
Well, I would urge the Tories not to be lazy, because they do still just have a majority of 12. All they need is for for the opposition to be united and for 6 Tory MPs to vote against something. And that makes backbenchers hugely powerful. I mean, you've got the Runnymede Tories, the Tories who are in favour of civil liberties. You've got the Eurosceptics. You've got the Europhiles. It's... So they cannot be complacent, and there will be by-elections coming up over the Parliament, and you do not need to be a particularly good opposition to win by-elections.
No, that's very true.
So John Major, again going back to John Major, he eventually lost his majority in the House of
Yeah, it
Commons.
just slipped away, didn't it? It just kept.
Yeah, he started with a larger majority than Cameron has, particularly when there's a whole referendum going on. I mean, that's a bit of a wild card thrown into all of this. What will the effect of the European referendum be? I mean, Harold Wilson in 1974, he lost his majority, and then Lib Lab Pack, Jim Callaghan, etc. So you cannot be complacent, even if the leader of the opposition is awful. You cannot be complacent on a majority of 6.
Yeah, I think
on a majority of
that's very
12.
wise. I kind of get suggestions that I don't know. I get the message that perhaps the Tories. I'm not saying they're going to act this out, but I get the impression that they've sort of learned from some of their past lessons. They've learned what happened when they enforced in, say, the late 80s and 90s, and I don't know. I get the sense that they're trying to play this a bit smoother than they did before. Whether or not it'll go tits up when the referendum comes, I do not know. But
that depends. That really depends who. I think Cameron's learned it, and Osborne's learned it. Whether people like Bill Cash and Peter Bone and Jacob Rees-Mogg have learned it, that's a different question. Because particularly when you think when you think that your opponents are weak, when you think that Labour under Jeremy Corbyn is completely unelectable, etc., there is a temptation to say, "Oh, we are free from the shackles. We do not need to play to the centre anymore. We can do whatever we like. We can build a 20-foot statue of Margaret Thatcher in the middle of Trafalgar Square and what have you, and it will be great." And that will probably be the great struggle of the Parliament. And I was saying to a friend of mine, Brian, when we had a couple of weeks ago. Was it a couple of weeks? I can't remember if it was before or after the recess, but
I think that was August, wasn't it? Yeah.
Really late night parliamentary session, and those are probably going to become common over this Parliament. We are probably going to have a lot of late sittings, very much like the 70s all over again, I think.
Yeah, although I do have a slight weird soft spot for Jacob Rees-Mogg, which I don't know where that comes from.
Yeah, Jacob Rees-Mogg is part of that brilliant class of MPs who are wrong on everything, but who you still want in Parliament because they're enjoyable. Like Dennis Skinner. Like you wouldn't want Dennis Skinner to be out just because he's enjoyable to watch.
Oh yeah, he's pure theatre, isn't he? He's really great.
Yeah.
I mean, there's an alternate universe where Dennis Skinner faces Rees-Mogg across the dispatch box, and that would be absolutely brilliant to watch. But
well, Jeremy Corbyn managed to get elected leader of the Labour Party. Who says that Jacob Rees-Mogg can't be elected leader of the Tories? Lightning can strike twice.
Well, that's it. almost got to the point a few weeks ago where I was going to go, right. I thought I understood something about politics, but what do I know? Jeremy Corbyn's leader of the opposition. I might as well just, I don't know, retire from having views because it's just there's no point now. But
Oh, I understand that completely. Once upon a time, I could guess and it is just how remarkable our current politics is. Because once upon a time, I could guess everything right. Everything was predictable. You know, I predicted the rise of UKIP years before it actually happened. I predicted the coalition, etc., etc., etc. And now everything is in flux, and it is weird, but it is also interesting. And
oh, it's bloody enjoyable. I'm not going to lie. I do find you much more interesting now. It's interesting you touch on coalitions, Mike. I mean, obviously, we're at a low point now with 8. So, I don't think we're necessarily thinking of coalition something in the near future. But that said, I mean, I don't necessarily see the kind of idea of a coalition with Corbyn's Labour to be something that would necessarily work. But I think, am I right in saying that the kind of red line now is electoral reform for the Lib Dems in a coalition?
Yeah, both Tim Farron and Norman Lamb said during the leadership contest they would only enter in a coalition with PR without a referendum.
So are we in saying that basically ruling out coalition with the Tories? I know we're not. I know we're not kind of like officially, but if we give a demand which we know they will never kind of agree to, are we not kind of by default doing that?
It's an interesting it's an interesting question. But one of the things you should remember is that there are stages below coalition, so we may get out on a technicality and do a supply and confidence agreement or a vote by vote agreement. I suppose it's a question of how far do you think the Tories will go, and will they do PR? Probably not. Do I think Labour would do PR without a referendum? Not at the moment. No, not led by Jeremy Corbyn. So,
I've got hopes for whoever becomes the kind of next leader of Labour. So whoever has to pick up the pieces from Corbyn. I don't know. I get the impression that perhaps after another drubbing, Labour kind of by default or pragmatism may come round to some form of electoral reform.
They have to. I actually wrote a blog about this to plug myself. It's called Squiffy Liberalism. Google it.
Try and put a link to that, definitely.
Well, I was plugging that to anyone nuts enough to listen to this. If you've listened to me talk about about Lib Dem conference constitutional amendments at this point, you may as well.
Yeah, if you've come this far, you're probably going to do that. So that's fair enough.
But I wrote Scotland changes everything. Scotland changes everything. The loss of those 40 seats. I mean, Labour did worse in Scotland than the Lib Dems. Previously, Labour held 41 seats. They lost 40, kept 1, and currently there are 4 winnable seats in Scotland for Labour. That's seats which I count as having 15% or less of a swing required to win. For the Liberal Democrats, where we had 11 seats, we lost 10. The number of winnable seats is 6. If you did worse than the Lib Dems on May the 7th, 2015, you had a bad election.
Yes,
and
very much so.
Worse. And without Scotland, Labour wouldn't have won a majority in 2005. It wouldn't have won a majority in either of the 1974 elections. The only times Labour would have won a majority government without Scotland would have been 1945, 1966, 1997, and 2001. 4 times in its history would have won a majority without Scotland.
So do you think maybe longer term we're going to see, perhaps we could see Scotland as kind of the hinge where, because it's now, not something Labour can win outright for the short to medium term, that this might be what forces Labour to kind of reconsider electoral reform?
Yes, definitely, and also the fact that the Labour vote has become fragmented. If you look, basically the collapse of the Lib Dem vote, much of it into the Labour vote, concealed the complete fragmentation of the Labour vote. without the Lib Dem collapse, which was around 6%, Labour would have got around 24% at this election. Its worst result in history. So, quite frankly, I don't think Labour can afford to be without reform, because they their vote has fractured. One of their areas of concentrated votes has gone, and I think permanently gone. And they were never very good at winning elections anyway. I mean, I'm not kidding with that. They were pretty rubbish at winning elections. If you look at like the days when it was the Conservative Party and the Liberal Party won elections more often than the Conservative Party. If
That's
you
a
look
fair
at the
point.
day when it was the Whigs and the Tories, the Whigs won elections more often than the Tories, whereas Labour has actually done a pretty damn poor job on the whole during its time of winning elections. Indeed, it's only, as I said, those elections where it didn't win with Scotland were the only time without Scotland were the only times where it won significant working majorities.
I think that's a really, really good point, and I think this is one of the things that it doesn't annoy me if somebody doesn't make out they're really into politics, but there's certain people who are, say, under 25 or under 30 who really mouth off about politics, and I'm talking more about your kind of Corbyn kind of supporters, who just don't have a sense of historical perspective, and because they were children under a Labour government, they have assumed that is a natural state of affairs, when you just have to go on Wikipedia, and it isn't. It's like I was sorry,
Yeah,
Mike, go on.
yeah. I mean, another fact I threw into that blog post I did was that the only Conservative leaders since World War One who haven't been Prime Minister at some point are William Hague, Ian Duncan Smith, and Michael Howard. The equivalent list for Labour.
It's a good point.
The equivalent list for Labour, even if you don't include interim leaders, is I think 9 people. So
yeah, you've pretty much touched on what was going to be my next point, because I saw that Dan Hodges, who by mentioning Dan Hodges, I'm now a Tory, but it's I quite like him. I think he's all right, to be fair. I mean, I'm a pessimist at heart myself, so I think he's all right. But he put out a tweet today saying that when Corbyn loses, which I'm going to be presumptuous to say when, but when Corbyn loses, of the last 8 Labour leaders, only one of them has won, and which is remarkable when you think about it. Like that, I was looking at that thinking, oh Jesus Christ, that is true. And then I went on Wikipedia and looked at the last 8 Conservative leaders, and the number's 5, like you were saying, which is, I mean, it's a remarkable discrepancy.
Yeah, and of course the guy they hate. I mean, I hate Blair, but I'm supposed to hate Blair. I'm in a different party.
Very true.
I'm supposed to dislike Blair, but the guy that Labour hates more than anyone is the guy who put those 3 Conservative leaders, the only ones who haven't been Prime Minister since World War One, who put them in essentially as a political irrelevance, and they hate the guy.
Well, it's all a bit weird, isn't it? Because when you meet Tories, when you meet people who are like unashamedly Tory, they love Margaret Thatcher. They think, oh, Thatcher, she was amazing. You never seem to meet Labour supporters who are like, oh yeah, Blair was great. Blair was meant, like, you just don't get that, and I don't get it.
It's an interesting point, but there was a period where they did have to get over Thatcher. Indeed, there was quite a good article about how, with Cameron winning a majority in 2010, they're finally over Thatcher. Because keep in mind that after Thatcher and then Major, they were out of government for nearly as long a period as Labour were as Labour's wilderness years. So
or Labour will be again.
Yeah, probably, yeah. But yeah, they did have a period where they had to get over Thatcher as well. So maybe Labour will do that one day. Maybe the wilderness years that we are predicting over the next 2 decades. 2 decades.
That's a fair point.
Maybe that will get them over it. But
I tell you what, though, I mean, when I've seen people talking about how Corbyn's covered, and it's the whole, oh, it's the MSM, it's the Tory MSM who are having a go at him. People need to take a step back and go, no, remember when Ian Duncan Smith was Tory leader, right? The Tories can pick rubbish people as leader, and also the press really didn't like Ian Duncan Smith. Like this idea that if Labour elect a different leader, everyone's going to gang up on them. I just think no. When the Tories elected crap leaders, people went for them.
Yeah, I mean, what Labour really need now is an equivalent to Michael Howard, sort of just a safe pair of hands to get them through it all, which really should be Alan Johnson, but Alan Johnson won't stand. So, I mean, that's sort of the question that Labour moderates need to be asking at the moment is who is a safe pair of hands to look after the party until, they can start to build ground again. But currently, there isn't a figure that really matches that.
I think you're absolutely right. To bring it back to Scotland, though, which kind of sent us off here, because I think it does bring us back to Liberal Democrats. I guess my first point would be, I mean, I've got a few mates who are Scottish, so I've kind of followed Scottish politics more than I necessarily would. And it's interesting, up until about 18 months ago, I was a bit ambivalent towards the SNP. I didn't necessarily have a set view either way of the SNP. And then it's funny that it kind of coincided around the time I joined Twitter. I decided that I fucking hate the SNP. Which
funny enough, the Cybernats leave me alone. I've only got like crap from the Cybernats, I think like twice. I get stuff from UKIPers and from Corbynistas, but like loads. But the Cybernats leave me alone, and I don't know why.
I think I provoke them, and I found, I don't know if anyone does want to provoke them. I found some good ways of doing it, which is one, to consistently refer to Scotland as North Britain in conversations, which is brilliant. And then to keep comparing Scotland to Yorkshire in all conversations.
Same population, same economy as Yorkshire.
Yeah, just say that every time. And then say, well, Yorkshire should be independent. And then go, why not? Same population, used to be independent in the last millennium. No problem. And they just you can see them winding themselves up. And I do in part judge parties by the people who support them. And I think, I don't know, I think there's something telling. You can tell a lot about a party from its nutters. I think that applies for all parties. You can tell a lot about them from their fringe, and you could say some bad things about the Lib Dems maybe in that case, but then again, I don't think our nutters are as bad as their nutters. So that's good.
That should be like on our recruitment videos. Our nutters aren't as bad as their nutters.
Yeah, it's true though.
Well, the SNP are currently defying political reality, and this is sort of the problem with them. Is that
do you mean being simultaneously presented as an opposition and a governing party?
That's what I was going to say. Yes, that was going to be my point. After that was going to be my second point.
Sorry.
My first point was going to be that healthcare. They're doing awfully when it comes to healthcare. They're doing awfully when it comes to education. And they're doing quite badly when it comes to basically most of the other issues that are taking as benchmarks of governing competence.
What's this thing, Mike, about how if you're in Scotland, you have to have somebody who works for the government to be named and responsible for each child? Have you heard of this?
Yes, named persons, which I'm not sure if it's gone through yet or not.
It sounds a bit mental.
Well, it is. I mean, Scott, the SNP are very much an authoritarian party.
And then there's land seizures. Well, I know I'm being over the top saying land seizures, but there's the idea that if you can, I remember listening to on the radio saying if you can use land more responsibly and put a community plan together, you can just have it. Which,
well, yeah, I mean, the SNP are very much an authoritarian party. They've also got the what is essentially a revival of the ID card scheme. And revival of the national database sort of scheme of they are very much heirs to New Labour. I mean, which is weird, really, because a lot of them hate the red Tories, but in a lot of respects, including the authoritarianism, including their approach to the economy. They are very New Labour. and
Yeah.
and yet they are managing to defy the normal laws of politics by being simultaneously a governing party and an opposition.
But then again, I mean, I think that's best understood by the kind of monoculture of thought, which is independence. It's just independence, and I think
Yeah,
the
and
hate.
it's what allows you to have like people who are left of Jeremy Corbyn and dedicated Thatcherites in the same party. It's just that commitment to independence.
Yeah, above anything. I mean, I remember just looking into, can Scotland work economically independent, and I just don't think it can. I just don't think any of it adds up at
It,
all.
it, it could work, but they wouldn't be as prosperous as they are now, and they
Yeah,
certainly wouldn't have the
absolutely.
public services they are now on the taxes they pay now. I
So
mean, the entire vision for Scottish independence were that the SNP put forward during the independence referendum was based on oil costing $100 or more a barrel.
I think it's
Well,
113 to be geeky.
yes,
I think that
yes,
was what they were going for.
$113, and now it is what, $48 per barrel.
Oh
Last
no,
I
it's
saw.
dropped massively. Yeah, I mean, I don't. If we do come to having a second referendum, I just don't know how they can make the case for economically, because
They
it's
don't need
just
to anymore because it's just based on on identity. It is identity politics run rampant. If you do not support the SNP, if you do not vote for independence, you are not a patriotic Scot. You are, that's their message.
yeah. I find
And
it really dispiriting that this has happened in British politics. This idea that everything's wrong. So how we were speaking about electoral reform before, and how we believe it's pretty messed up as it is, and we do need to radically change it. I mean, but the thing that I think is good is we can really have a passionate view of this really needs to change, and we also don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. We still think Britain's a functioning state. I mean, but you listen to people like the SNP, and they're just catastrophic in how they talk. I mean, you'd think we were like North and South Sudan. Like you'd think Britain was a fundamentally failed state, but it's not. I mean, it's a largely settled state. I mean, I don't get the impulse behind it. But then again, I'm not a Scottish nationalist. It's hard.
you should get a Scot Nat to come on and talk to you at some point, and then just see how well that goes.
I think I just get shouted at. I mean, I do have a friend who's vaguely leaning towards independence, who's got a much more nuanced view than a lot of the kind of cyber nuts, but I think they're in a minority, to be honest. I think there's a lot of shouty stuff going on there. But to weave this back into the Lib Dems, Mike, so I think if we look back to kind of, I don't know, would you say that our main heartland was the Southwest before it got wiped out?
Yes.
Yeah, so in terms of why we lost the Southwest, I mean, the kind of one of the big things I've heard is that people were just generally scared of the idea of Ed Miliband and the SNP governing. And is that a fair assumption in your eyes as to why we lost there?
Well, a lot of the reason we lost Southwest is I know this seems to keep coming up again and again and again, but was first past post. If you look at the British Electoral Study report of the election, we did much better in the Southwest than we did pretty much any other region.
Okay.
I think we got 15% of the vote there, compared to stuff like 5.6% in the West Midlands.
I was going to say 15% is pretty good actually for 2015 for us.
Yeah. So a lot of it was the electoral system. In fact, I mean, if you look at Cornwall, if you were to do Cornwall proportionally, I think it would be 3 Conservative, 2 Lib Dems and 1 Labour. I think that's off the top of my head, and the actual result was 6 Conservative. So, going back to your original question, yes, Sophia probably did have quite a significant effect, but we did run a crap campaign. Like our air war, our ground war was good. Our ground war, if you look at the engagement rates that we had, if you look at the door knocking rates and leafleting rate, the amount of engagement we had with voters on the ground, it was pretty good. But our air campaign,
Are you talking about the whole
I'm talking
look,
about
look,
Ryan
look.
Coatsy. That's who I'm talking about.
Was he? Was he responsible for the whole stability and unity and look left, look right, and all that kind of
Yes.
that
And
bollocks, basically?
if we ever analyze, when we come to analyze the 2015 campaign, I want to have basically I just want to have a picture of that image of the scales where it said borrow however many billion less than Labour, um, cut however many billion less than the Conservatives, and then just have the words "never again" printed in massive letters underneath it.
Well, I did think at the time. I did think, this is crap.
Well, it's not an inspiring message. It's not an independent message, and it just played in. It also sort of played into the obsession with coalitions.
Yeah, I
Um,
mean, I don't understand. I genuinely don't understand how that was allowed to just keep going. Like, I refuse to believe that enough people behind the scenes were going, "This is ridiculous." Like, I don't get how that just.
oh, there were plenty. Of people who were saying that was. Jenny Willett said it. I'm trying to think. There are other senior Lib Dem figures, and I think the Guardian article, the long Guardian article about the Clegg catastrophe one.
Oh, I read that. That was
That
quite good, actually.
Yeah, it was. I think that said some of the other senior figures, who said how ridiculous that campaign
I
was.
got the impression in Nick's speech at the conference, he sort of, in a coded way, admitted it was maybe a crap idea.
Well, he can't not really, and
True.
everyone said. I mean, I remember campaigning in Leeds, and being in a pub with a bunch of other younger activists, and just lamenting the message and how completely devoid of any independent character it was. I mean, yeah, and so that was why the short campaign was bad. Specifically, in the longer term, the reason for electoral failure. I don't think it was that people didn't look at us and think we were bad in coalition particularly. People didn't look at us and think we were good in coalition particularly. If you ask people the same question of if you thought of basically assigning blame for people's for what people thought was bad that the coalition did, and if you ask them the question of assigning praise for what people think was good that the coalition did, only around 17% or so of people say that the Lib Dems either did something good or did something bad. The vast majority of people thought that we were inconsequential, and that is fatal because at that point we are an irrelevant. We weren't an irrelevance at all. I mean, no Lib Dem member thinks that we were an irrelevance in government. We achieved a whole plethora of stuff, from same-sex marriage to the pupil premium, to green energy investment, which has now been scrapped. We achieved a whole plethora of things that we know about, but not that the public know about, and they thought we were inconsequential. And quite frankly, if you think that the Lib Dems were inconsequential had an inconsequential effect on the Tories, and maybe them governing as a majority will change the opinions of those people who think we did. But if they thought that we were inconsequential, then why wouldn't you just vote for a Tory majority anyway?
It's a very good point, and to use one personal example, I remember speaking to my mum about things Lib Dems had done, and I mean, I think she had genuinely never heard that we brought in, free school meals or focused on mental health or.
Oh,
So
the worst one's probably the income tax rate.
I was just going to come off my lips. Yeah.
That was 2010. It was the first pledge on the front page of our manifesto, was raising the income tax threshold, and who got it was the government's most popular policy, and who got every single bit of the credit? The Tories did.
But there's that great bit in the debate where he ruled it out, isn't there? Do you remember?
Yeah, he said I would love to do it, Nick, but we cannot afford it. Well, it's amazing what you can afford if you don't give an inheritance tax cut to millionaires. That's what I say.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I just found it completely baffling. But then again, I mean, it's not for us as political geeks, and even myself then, who, I wasn't a Lib Dem member then, so it shows that at least I was reading up a bit, I guess. But it's why did people like my mum not know that? I mean, that's the key failing.
And I think the mess, and I think as I said, the message was so obsessed with the heart for Conservatives, brain for Labour, that that at no point did we get across why we were either a brain or a heart, or any of our proper achievements in government. And partly, as I said, that was short campaign, but it was a longer term problem as well. I mean, partly this was a problem with the positions we held in government. With some of the positions we held in government, I wrote a piece about that as well. Nick Harvey did a brilliant report about basically how we should have ensured we had more of an influence and a more of an independent media strategy in particular, to make sure that our voice was distinct and independent. And
Yeah, I think I mean one of the suggestions for the future, which I've really liked, is the idea that the Liberals try and dominate one kind of department, which I mean it is a beautiful thing to say with hindsight. And I don't necessarily like people criticizing the coalition with hindsight, because you know, I'd love some people to describe what they would have done. And I think in the circumstances, broadly, people did the right things. But I think for the future, kind of dominating a department might be quite a good step.
well, that's what tend to do in Europe. I don't necessarily agree. I think that it should just be a red line. I mean, it's a bit unrealistic now, but maybe in 2010 it wouldn't have been. I mean, if we're in a position where we're forcing them to give us electoral reform without a referendum, then something weird's happened anyway, and we have like 100 seats or what have you.
True, true.
If we'd have had the position of chancellor, then it probably would have been good enough to show, because then, you know, every budget day would be a Lib Dem budget day and what have you. I think the problem was that the position, a big part of the problem is that the position of prime minister, of chancellor of the exchequer, of home secretary, and of foreign secretary, just the amount of media exposure, the amount of prestige and the amount of influence that comes with that role, comes with those roles, is so utterly overwhelming.
That's a good
that
point.
you cannot not have any of them and then be sort of seen as that. I mean, the prime minister, your equivalent, you have the deputy prime minister and you have the secretary of state for beers and what have you. It's quite simply, and we didn't have that many large departments outside of those either. We should have had education by all rights. We should have had education, and we didn't.
I think in retrospect, you know, what was deputy a good position for the leader to be in? Because I don't.
Yes. Nick said, and I think, and I certainly trust him on this, that having a departmental role as well as being deputy prime minister, and as deputy prime minister, I will point out he did have a veto on government policy.
That's a very good point, because I guess my naive point was going to be, sorry, Mike. My naive point was going to be that day to day you don't necessarily see what the role of the deputy prime minister is, and I don't know. I kind of thought, are you going to get the impact you should as deputy? But I see what you're saying, actually.
Yeah, I don't think it would be. I don't think you would have time to both have a departmental role and do that effectively, and have the role of deputy prime minister and party leader and do that effectively. I don't think it would be possible. But we should have had one of the great. Again, this is. I said it independently from Nick Harvey's report, but Nick Harvey was a minister himself and says it much more eloquently. We should have had one of the great offices of state. We should have had one of the great day-to-day departments like education. And we should have had something that is one of the medium-sized but still important departments like transport. The fact is that, frankly, as much influence as our ministerial posts had, people did not associate us with many of the most important roles that government undertakes, and therefore we are seen as an irrelevance. Wrong though that may be.
Yeah, I'd agree there. I think you've shifted my view on the kind of role of the deputy PM there. Although remember, you're not allowed to call them great departments of state now after the Labour reshuffle, because they're all worth the same. You know, the Foreign Office is definitely not more important than communities and transport and everything. apparently.
We're falling into outdated 19th century concepts of government. That's what we're doing.
Yeah, like the idea that your
I
economy or your
have to
foreign
say,
policy is at the prime.
I have to say that people who say that Jeremy Corbyn doesn't spin, that has to be surely that has to prove that that's not true. I mean, the whole essentially inventing 2 new ministerial posts to give them to women, and
Yeah,
then
it's pure
making
spin.
Angela Eagle first Secretary of State and substitute for Corbyn at PMQs. That was spin right out of the book of Peter, right out the book of Alistair Campbell and Peter Mandelson, that sort of figure. I mean, plain and simple.
Yeah, I'll give you an interesting example as well. With the line, we have more than 50% of our cabinet are women. From speaking to people I know, and in particular on this example, women in because even though I'm in a safe Tory seat, I kind of go towards Pontefract, which is quite a Labour area. A lot of women who naturally line towards Labour don't like this idea, and I don't think they realise this. They all kind of go, well, they should get it because they're good. And I'm not saying the people he's appointed aren't good. I'm just saying this idea that if you just have a soundbite, which I think you're completely right, Mike, it is a soundbite. If you have a soundbite saying half of our cabinet is women, a lot of women who necessarily vote Labour will say, well, why? And I don't think they get that yet.
Well, I mean, to be fair, there are a lot of women who you could point to the great officers of state within Labour. I mean,
absolutely. I mean, he should have. He should have.
I mean, quite frankly, a pile of coats would make a better Shadow Chancellor than John McDonnell. So yes. The idea that Angela Eagle couldn't have been Shadow Chancellor is completely wrong.
Oh yeah. Yeah, and I'm not saying she shouldn't. I mean, there's no universe where I wouldn't have appointed Angela Eagle over John McDonnell. I mean, on the other hand, I just mean on the specific soundbite of kind of essentially making up shadow cabinet roles to say you've got more women than men. I don't know. I don't think that necessarily goes down with the public. I think the public don't view things like that.
Well, I think it would have been. I think it would have been important to his supporters, and it would. And as I said, it's spin. It's important to have a media response to the line of half of all your great officers of state aren't. But I mean, I don't judge Corbyn's shadow cabinet particularly highly, to be honest with you. I mean, any shadow cabinet with John McDonnell as Shadow Chancellor and
but they're just writing the jokes, aren't they? I mean, they put John McDonnell as Shadow Chancellor. They have a vegan farming kind of, I think it is a vegan, isn't it?
Yes, it's a vegan agricultural minister.
That's it, yeah.
Which I wouldn't say anything was particularly, which I would have defended up until the point she said that meat eaters should be treated like smokers.
Yeah, she lost me there too.
Yeah, I mean, there's nothing inherently wrong with having a vegan farming minister. I mean, people are free to have their own life choices. And also, there's nothing wrong with people eating meat because people are free to have their own life chances. So,
but it kind of strikes me this idea that Labour have at the minute, where they know how the game's going to be played, but then they just go, "Well, fuck it, we won't do that." It's like there will have been a conversation where they went, "Oh, shall we put so and so at agriculture?" Then they go, "Oh, she's a vegan. People might take the piss," and then they'll have gone, "Nah, we'll do it anyway." And it's just like this idea that we're not going to care about how things are presented now, which I don't know. I mean, I'm not saying everything should be about presentation, but I think you're living in an alternate universe if you think presentation isn't an element that's there.
Well, yeah, but I mean, you still have threw presentation out the window when you elected Corbyn.
Well, very, very good point. I mean, another interesting thing when you mentioned spin is, the whole thing about this is straight talking politics, but it's that straight talking that people can't understand your quotes about Hamas or the IRA, and you have to constantly go back and kind of make them clear. Like, I don't understand how that's straight talking. Like,
people hate political speak but forget what political speak is for. Political speak. You saw that engage. You saw me and Robbie talking on Twitter, where I pointed out that he was actually using like trademarked quotes of political speak.
It was a very funny moment. I remember sipping my tea and laughing.
Well, yeah, because political speak does exist for a reason, and it sort of has to exist for a reason, because your parties because in any situation where you are taking collective responsibility, where you are not just speaking for yourself, but you are speaking for a party or speaking for a faction or speaking for a leader, there will be awkward moments and awkward questions because no one agrees with everyone else 100%. I mean,
Yeah, absolutely.
so if I get asked, if I'm in a debate and I get asked about our Trident policy, you know, I probably I won't agree with our Trident policy in all probability. But you know, if you're in a debate in front of a few hundred people, you can't really just say, "Oh yeah, I think it's a bit rubbish," can you? So
No, it's true. Very true.
political speak does exist for a reason. It exists to give you to allow you to answer awkward questions without outright lying.
I agree. I'll tell you another thing though. You know how I mentioned earlier that I get a bit annoyed with kind of younger people not having any historical memory. One of the things that I seem to really get my beamer bonnet about, and I know I'm getting presented as kind of being a bit old fashioned about this, but I really, really dislike the kind of Sinn Féin now basically the Sinn Féin labelling, which is now apparent. I really dislike the wording used towards the IRA by Corbyn and McDonnell, and I just don't understand how there's so that people kind of in their early 20s or late teens who are just like, yeah, I don't mind. Like it just baffles me. It absolutely baffles me that they can do that.
Well, it's partly it comes down to I ran on something not quite to do with politics. How shit history it's taught. How shitly history is taught in this country.
But is this
People.
history though, Mike? I mean, this is pretty like this
Well,
is
that was gonna be my point. People who are our age don't know about the Troubles, which is absurd.
yeah, it's
Um,
crackers.
but it didn't get covered at any point in school.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I've got mates
I,
from Northern Ireland, so I kind of understand it. I'm not saying understand it. I know about it more, but
Well,
I just
I've always found the situation of Northern Ireland completely fascinating, going all the way back to the 1800s. So I know it fairly in depth, but at no point is any of it covered in mandatory education. At no point is the Cold War covered in mandatory education. We have a weird way of teaching history in this country during the mandatory during the mandatory. Okay. During the mandatory periods of education, where we sort of fetishize certain things, like Henry VIII and his wives.
I was going to say it's Tudors and World War II, isn't it?
Yeah, Tudors, World War II. We never covered Napoleon and the Napoleonic Wars. We never covered the Wars of the Roses. We never covered. I mean, I could go on and on and on.
No,
We
I
know
agree.
we have a bizarre way of teaching and a completely insubstantial way of teaching mandatory education. Once you get to A level, it's fine. A level history onwards, in the GCSE history onwards isn't bad, but A level history onwards is really good. We do it really well. Indeed, at university, we are world leaders in teaching history, and yet our mandatory history at secondary school, at primary schools, is god awful.
Absolutely. I mean, it's just, I don't know, it's a bugbear of mine, but on the specific point of you'll have somebody shouting off on Twitter who, is a Corbyn supporter and makes out they're deeply passionate about politics. And then you will just say something like, but Martin McGuinness was in the IRA. And they will be like, well, if he was or not, I don't know. And it's like, I thought you followed modern British politics. I mean, how do you not know that Martin McGuinness was a terrorist? Like, I don't understand it. I don't understand where there's that lack of knowledge. It just, I don't know. It's baffling.
Yeah, well, I mean,
sorry, it's a little moan of mine there. It's just, I just don't get it. I don't get it. But to bring this slightly back onto Lib Dems, so I guess what I was trying to say at first is, you've got the fear thing from 2015 of, are Labour going to go off the SNP? And are we necessarily going to do as well in 2020? Just on the point of, are the Tories not going to run the fear 2.0 in that, you're going to have the SNP and an even worse Labour leader who's even said he'll work with them?
well, no, because I don't think that the election result will ever be in doubt. I mean, just on the boundary reforms alone, the boundary reforms would give the Tories a majority of 50
Good point.
on the 2015 election result. My prediction is, even if they get rid of him, with all the damage that Corbyn will have done by the point they get rid of him, we are looking at a Tory majority of 100 anyway. So the fear doesn't really work if the election result is almost certainly a Tory majority.
Yeah, no, I agree. I just so you're basically saying it's locked into that extent that people won't necessarily be worrying about the idea it could go the other way. They'll just think, well, it's going
Yeah,
to be Tory anyway.
when the Lib Dems tend to do well is when the election result isn't particularly in doubt.
Okay, I
In
can see
terms of
that.
seats, maybe not in terms of votes, but in terms of seats, because squeeze messages just work so much worse.
That's a really good point that I didn't consider there. I was automatically in my mind going, right, SNP still in there, even worse Labour leader. Everyone's going to think,
Well,
oh my God, it's. But
there
yeah,
are
yeah, I see what you mean.
sort of like two strains of thought in the Lib Dems about this. One of the strains of thoughts is mine that we do well when the result isn't in doubt. The other strain of thought, which to be fair does have backing with it, keep in mind that 1997 is when we made the great breakthrough and got 46 seats, is that we do well when Labour does well because because many of our seats are Tory facing, particularly in the southwest. So we need the Conservative vote to be depressed for us to do well. Both of them are. I mean, as I said, I think the former, but the latter isn't to be discounted. So yeah, you can make arguments either way. In all honesty, it's not hard to set one or the other.
No, I think that's actually a really good point. I mean, that's something I personally didn't really factor in, and perhaps should have. Um, I guess one of my other points, Mike, was going to be in terms of where we stand on things, because at the minute, I think this ties into how we thought the messaging was rubbish at the election, and I've seen a lot of kind of articles and studies saying that young people are much more intrinsically liberal than older generations, both in an economic and social sense. And how do you think the party necessarily reaches out to these people? Because you've got a lot of young people who are necessarily either not voting or going towards the Greens or going towards Corbyn. But then again, I mean, they have very let and live views on things, which I think makes them liberals. So I don't know. How do we get these people to vote Lib Dem?
It's interesting. I tend to. I mean, they call it sort of like a liberal century. I tend to call it an individualist century, which is a bit different because it also presents opportunities for the Tories as sort of liberal progressives. Because I mean, like, I think that the great political battle over the next 50 years will be between sort of like modern Thatcherism, best epitomized by George Osborne. Like George Osborne is basically what the Tories will want to be doing over the next 50 years if they want to win in this new individualist age.
And on that point, a brief tangent. Do you think Osborne's going to get the leadership?
Probably. I will not place any bets with the Tories because they have a habit of picking someone completely random. But probably.
He's doing all the right things, isn't he?
Yeah, I mean, him and Theresa May sort of ganged up to make a joke out of Boris Johnson. So it will probably be between him and May. I really hope it's not Theresa May because there are a few more authoritarian people in the country.
That's a very good point. Yeah.
But yeah, as I was saying, I think the great battle of the next 50 years will be between between that sort of modern Thatcherism and between a form of progressive liberalism, which would have been Blairism if Labour hadn't been unwilling to continue with it.
Yeah, I can see that.
And I very much hope that it is a liberal Democrat form of progressive liberalism. I mean, it's interesting. Blair always elicits such hatred, but what I say about Blair is that he is liberal except in ways which matter a lot to liberals and don't matter much to Joe, member of the public.
Yeah,
Like,
I think that's absolutely precisely right, actually.
which is sort of why you elicit so much hatred from liberals. Because, I mean, he's an authoritarian. He doesn't care about political reform. He doesn't, he wanted ID cards and all of these horrible things for us liberals. But Betty, who is a nurse, she doesn't care much about political reform or particularly about databases and what have you. She cares about NHS investment and a growing economy and what have you. So, yeah, that's what I think about Blair, is that he was very much a liberal, except in the ways which matter to liberals. And I'm probably, if certain other members of the Lib Dems find this, they're probably going to yell at me now. But no, I'm not saying I like Blair. I'm definitely not saying that. I dislike Blair for all of the reasons that liberals dislike Blair. But,
it's a good point, though. People don't treat Blair like a human, do they? And in the sense that I think we all fuck up, and we all have bits of our lives and policies that aren't great. And I'd love to see a bit more nuance in how people see Blair, and they can kind of agree with some things and disagree with some things. Because I think if you're a liberal, from a liberal perspective, there's a lot of things about Blair which I think were quite good about his government.
Blair's first term was good. Blair's first term,
Yeah.
the 1997 to 2001, was one of the best British governments has been, in all honesty. I mean, there was the project with Paddy Ashdown. If you are looking at this from like a partisan Lib Dem position, there was some political reform. There was it was kept. They kept Ken Clarke's spending plans. There was it was quite a good term of government. And then 2001 happened. Then he won in 2001, and then everything went to hell. That's sort of my perspective.
Pretty much.
He became authoritarian. He went to war in Iraq. He allowed Brown to massively raise public spending beyond what was sustainable or reasonable. So, yeah, I think 1997 to 2001 was a good term of government. But after 2001, it's really... And it's sort of what happens when you get majorities of... I think partly it's his own personal fault, and partly it is... sort of what happens to anyone when you get huge majorities. It happened to Thatcher towards the end of the terms. If you have a lot of power for a long time, then you start losing the resistance to use that power. I mean, to be to absolute, power corrupts, absolute power corrupts, absolutely, to use the old phrase.
I think that's good. I'll tell you what, you've given me a good example there by mentioning Iraq of another thing for the Lib Dems in the future, and that's foreign policy. Because I've noticed there's a bit of a tension within the party in that you've got some people who are really still quite pro what I guess I could classify as liberal interventionism, and then you've got some people who almost veer into the kind of certain section of the left's view of war. And I don't know how the party's going to reconcile that, actually. Or will it? Prove me wrong.
Well, I don't think the public... I think the public at the moment is war averse.
I'd agree.
The public at the moment is going... It has a mini Suez syndrome. And after Iraq is certainly not wanting to use ground troops or anything. And I don't see that changing for the foreseeable future. So, in terms of the use of military force, I don't think that will be a problem unless something unexpected happens.
Do we know what our position is going to be? Sorry, Mike. Do we know what our position is going to be regards the Syria vote that's coming up? Or have we not seen the details of that yet?
I don't know. I don't think Tim said anything on it yet, to be honest.
Yeah, which is going to be... I think that's going to be an interesting one to see how that plays out.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it comes down to what normal people would consider quite boring legalism about what is legal and what is illegal in terms of international law. for what it's worth, bombing in Syria probably would be legal from my perspective. I'm not an international lawyer, but I do study that sort of thing, so
Fair one.
I think it would probably be legal. But yeah, so a lot of it would come down to the legality of such action.
Yeah, I mean, I sound terrible for a liberal when I say this, but sometimes I don't like getting bogged down in the legalistic nature of it sometimes because I don't know, I am a bit intervention adverse, shall I say, in some specters, but I don't know, I guess I'm quite a realist and I do think that I do think that interests matter and I think sometimes you've got to choose between two very hard options, and some people just want to pick out a law book and go, well, you know, you can only do this and that, and I just don't think international relations is as simple as that. And
to be honest, I think generally the two, quite often the two do go a bit hand in hand. So over Ukraine, for example, I am very much in favor of a very firm response towards Russia. The very firm response towards Russia. And that's totally in line with international law. Quite frankly, Russia has broken international law. There is not a doubt in my mind, or the mind of basically anyone who studies international law, that Russia has gone and broken international law. So, so the two can be mated, because more often than not, though sometimes we are on the wrong side, more often than not the West is actually on the better side of international law. It's on the right side of international law.
Oh, I'd agree. I mean, it's I don't know. It's a funny old trope of modern politics that the West seems to do everything wrong whenever it intervenes, and I don't know. It seems to get a lot of cop from both sides. Which...
the George Galloway rule of despots. You're only a despot if George Galloway says you are.
Yeah, exactly.
George Galloway says you're a lovely chap. No matter how many millions of people you've killed, the left will think you're a lovely chap.
Yeah, which I mean, I don't know. It's a very morally relativistic way of looking at the world as well. You know, it's like I don't understand how these people are defending the oppressed when they seem quite comfortable with people living under horrible people. I mean, I do.
I'm midway through writing an article about this. It's because for them, oppression happens. It very much reflects their way of thinking about the world, because they are collectivists. So the way oppression works is that it is a collectivist. The idea of oppression is a collectivist ideal of oppression. Oppression happens from groups to other groups. So oppression happens from, say, white people to ethnic minorities. But what that leaves little room for is oppression on an individual level. So minorities within minorities become somewhat irrelevant, or free thinkers and what have you become irrelevant, which is why you start seeing ridiculous sites like senior Labour politicians appearing in front of gender segregated audiences.
Oh, it's ridiculous. I mean, really annoys me.
Yeah, because oppression is inflicted on a group level. Or why you can sometimes see people who are supposedly on the left and the progressive side of politics say that Majid Nawaz isn't a proper Muslim, or things like that, because oppression is doled out in groups, whereas a liberal view of oppression is that oppression is inflicted on individuals, and the rights and the fundamental human rights of an individual are what matters. And that.
Yeah, the Majid Nawaz thing really annoyed me. Actually, I really like what Majid's doing, and you know the idea that if someone who's from, I mean, I don't think it matters what background they're from, but particularly if someone from a Muslim background shares a picture of Muhammad, that, you know, people who describe themselves as liberal, you know, the tradition of John Stuart Mill, can then be like, oh, it's terrible. I mean, well, leaving aside your view of if it's terrible or not, you know, surely he's allowed to do it.
Free speech is the right to say things that we don't like.
Exactly.
That's what it's about.
Yeah, I mean that for me is the biggest appeal of liberalism. I love that, and I'd love us to be a party which kind of really said a lot more, not aggressively but firmly, about minorities within minorities, and people who are maybe gay in certain communities who don't feel good, or people who feel that they're not represented in certain communities. And I think it's something missing in modern politics that nobody's saying these things. Like you say, the best example being Labour with segregated audiences, which I find a bit repulsive personally. I really don't like it.
But yeah, I mean, as I said, I think that comes down to worldview, a collectivist worldview, as opposed to an individualist worldview,
Yeah,
and which I mean, that's why I think collectivism is flawed. It fundamentally allows to move beyond just oppression of minorities and or what have you. I think that's why collectivism is quite flawed. It's because it allows quite significant suffering to an individual person in the name of the collective good.
yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, I don't know. It's a whole rabbit hole of issues where the debate goes, but the whole thing about privilege now, which I've had to research intensely the kind of sociology around this because I didn't even know these people existed. I mean, but as in people who thought like this until 12 months ago. I'm showing the sheltered nature of my largely working class background there, and that people didn't use words like privilege where I grew up. But I just find it fantastical that we treat people as monoliths in these big blocks, like you said, and we don't treat people as people first. Because you see, I think that's how most people in Britain think. Most people in Britain see people as people first. They don't see people as blocks. So it annoys me when you get these groups in politics who see people homogeneously like that, because it's just
Yeah,
not how people think.
it also ignores intersectionality and numerous other things. But yeah, it's quite I think reality is just more nuanced than that.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. One of the other things I was going to ask you, Mike, in terms of broadening in liberal supports, we kind of touched on, young people being quite liberal. Is I don't want to use the term working class because it's a bit 20th century now, and it's kind of grouping people again into monoliths as we just spoke about. But I think it's a useful descriptor. Kind of how do we broaden working class support for Lib Dems? Because I think there is probably a fair stereotype that it's quite a middle class party.
Yes, there is. The old line that makes me cringe whenever I say it whenever I say or hear it of metropolitan liberal elite.
Yeah, exactly.
I think it's false, by the way. I think for the most part, the idea that liberalism is the ideology of a metropolitan elite is complete bollocks. Um, we just haven't been effectively able to pitch it to a.
You're right. You're right, though. Sorry, Mike. You're right because I think it is bollocks because, like you were saying about how some people have quite collectivist views. There's a lot of people who now move around in what are called "quote unquote" liberal circles in places like London, who do see people as groups. They don't see them as individuals first. Whereas I do think the day-to-day person on the street, you can tell it in what they say. They say, each to their own, or you do what you want and I'll do what I want. And I think working class people are far more liberal in that sense. They're far more. They don't care if people get money and spend it and enjoy themselves. They don't care if people do different things.
Well, when it comes to working, when it comes to I think um, to what people's basic ambitions are, it's actually relatively simple. They just want to have a good life, and the crux, the key to having a good life is relatively simple. You want a job that pays a decent wage. You want a house over your head, a roof over your head, and you want to be secure in that. That I mean, obviously, we can't promise that people will have, you know, a nice happy family and all of that sort of thing. But at the very least, politicians should be aiming to achieve that. So a big part of this, from a liberal perspective, has to be social mobility.
Yep, definitely.
Guaranteeing access to education of all types and at all levels. Probably prior to Vince Cable, really, our ideas about education was probably rather too focused on university. It was probably too university exclusive. One of the great successes during our period in government has been the expansion of apprenticeships. One of the great successes has been has been education for young people, pupil premium in particular, which has seen the attainment gap fall for the first time in many, many years. The attainment gap is the gap in attainment between the richer students and the poorer students poorer pupils, not students, pupils at school. So that's fallen. So that's a big part of it. Tim has been quite rightly focusing on the housing element of it. We need, quite frankly, we need to be radical on housing. I think we need a housing investment bank, which was in our last manifesto. We need housing association financial reforms to open up their access to housing, and probably the most controversially within the party, because to be honest, locally, on a local level, we do have quite a lot of NIMBYs. We need significant deregulation of the planning and building system.
Yeah, I can see how that might cause tension in somewhere like York, actually, to bring it back to local liberal politics there.
Yes, yes, because so much of the problems in the planning system do come back to in the housing shortfalls do come back to planning and do come back to passing the parcel or the green belt or um and it is I think it's got to the point where it's crept into. It used to be once upon a time that there were three big issues in politics: the economy, education, and health.
And housing has, like you say, really come up there, isn't it?
Housing has crept up to it. There are two, and I think this is partly one of the causes of sort of why politics has become less predictable, is because there's been two issues which have become significant issues that weren't really previously: immigration, of course, which has accompanied the rise of UKIP, and housing. And I think Tim has been very, very wise in trying to make us the party of housing. The first political broadcast he's done, which came out this week.
I saw that very randomly. It was good, wasn't it?
Yeah, was on housing, and I think Tim's been very wise in trying to make us party. And we had a really good slate of policies in the last manifesto, and now I think it's about building upon that, building upon the foundations of the 2015 manifesto. Sorry, to have it so we have a really solid policy offer when it comes to housing, and then just going on and on and on and on about it.
No, I think you're really dead on there, and I think that ties into I was saying to you about how do we get more young people to vote for Lib Dems, because I think for people of our generation, it's probably fair to say that the idea of owning a home is just not a reasonable suggestion, is it? Really, right now?
No, not until you're like 35.
Exactly, but I mean, I think the thing again is, we have short memories in Britain because this is not the norm. I mean, my parents had a home. They had a mortgage by the time they were my age.
Yeah, I mean, like to go back a generation before. I mean, my grandparents had got a like 20-bedroom house, not quite that large, but it was a very large house, and it came with a lot of land as well, like a massive. It was almost a farm, really, for relatively cheap. They were not a rich. My grandparents were not a rich family. They were. I mean, my granddad worked assembling mobile homes, I think. So they weren't. It was not unusual that you could buy a pretty decent house pretty young. Certainly during our grandparents' days, and to a lesser extent during our parents' days. And now, impossible. Particularly if you're living in a city. I mean, if you're living in somewhere like York or Cambridge or Oxford or London or it sounds like I'm saying just very elitist places, but those are the four cities with the highest housing prices in the UK, if I'm not wrong.
It's a very valid point. I mean, I've got a mate who's renting in London, in the East End, which is a place that historically was never like a great kind of focal point of London, and we're talking about £400 a month for like a room, and it doesn't even have a living room. He has to like share a kitchen, and it's a crap condition. And you just think, what the hell is going on with this? It's ridiculous. To put that into comparison, Mike, I mean, my brother last year was renting a detached house with a front garden and a back garden in my village for the same per month, pretty much, that my mate was renting a room in London,
Yeah, I mean,
which is crazy.
it's really time. It is time where we need to start being radical on this. Where we need to be saying, this it's not on. It's gone on. It's gone on for too long, and we need as a country to do something about this because it
I
is
have,
broken.
I have a weird idea that I think it'd be quite good to build prefabs again, but I don't know what people think about that.
As a short-term solution, yes, probably. You can run into all sorts of problems in the long term with prefabs, which if you talk to Andrew or Stephen, I think they can tell you about those in some detail.
Fair enough. There were two things I saw though that interest me. I went to Iceland last year, and in Reykjavik, a lot of the houses are made of tin, like kind of like tin walls and tin roofs, because there's no wood there, which is I always found quite interesting. And then I was thinking, I saw this thing where IKEA were doing a flat pack house, and I thought, if you could have a flat pack tin house, and the government could kind of invest in something and basically, at a factory level, push out houses. I don't know. I'm not saying it should be necessarily government owned at all, but I don't know, solutions like that which are a bit different and kind of take it seriously. I think that's what's needed.
Yeah, I mean, again, the problems you probably run into with that is the planning system.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I'm just rambling on about building tin houses, but I mean, yeah, the actual niche of build, like you say, the planning system's the one which you've got to nail. Which, like you say, it's good the parties, tackling that, I guess.
Anyway,
Oh, I hope we do.
yeah. So going back to try and answer your original question, how I think we appeal to working class voters is by quite simply housing and social mobility. They're the two big ones, in my opinion. They are the two great evils of our time to be slain. Put
Yeah,
it in Beveridgean
definitely,
terms.
definitely. I tell you, you know what you sort of reminded me of, or who you reminded me of when you were saying at the first what people want in life. That's a lot of what Liz Kendall was saying this summer.
Oh, I do like Liz. I'm not gonna
No,
lie.
I thought she was great.
I wouldn't mind. I wouldn't mind Liz. I mean, Liz. Everyone oversimplifies Liz as being just some sort of Blairite, but she's different from Blair in two very important ways. One, she's in favour of constitutional reform, and two, she's in favour of individual civil liberties. And
Yes.
if Liz Kendall defected, I would be a happy man. I'll say that.
Yeah, and I did notice a few chats on the Liberal Youth thing on Facebook where some people were getting into their I don't want any new Labourites coming across the Lib Dems kind of message, and I did notice you giving that kind of view of Liz, which
Well,
I
yeah,
think is a fair point.
I think people oversimplified her. I mean, Chucker, for example, probably you could just call a very standard Blairite. I mean,
Yeah, I'm not a fan of him actually.
no, I'm not particularly a fan of Chucker. You could probably call him a fairly standard Blairite with fairly few caveats. Whereas Liz, I think, is more complicated than that.
Yeah, I don't know. I think, like you say, there was more going on with her than people give her credit for, and yeah, it's a shame she only got 4.5%. Let's just say that.
Well, yeah.
I know.
Well, I mean, that's Labour's loss.
There, that's their worry, isn't it? So do you are there any other points you'd like to bring up? Because we've kind of spoke a lot of Lib Dems, and then we've kind of digressed into a lot of other stuff. But I mean, I guess the thing that we both found interesting was the future of Lib Dems. I mean, are there anything other things from kind of your perspective that you think are going to be important or should be important?
Um, It would be incredibly cliche, but events, dear boy, events. I mean, particularly oh god, I'm just getting into a rabbit hole of cliches here. There are known unknowns and there are unknown unknowns.
Yeah, but actually, to be fair though, you've steered it onto something we sort of didn't really talk about, which is Europe, isn't it? So
the European referendum is a known unknown. Um, my assumption is that it's going to be Remain vote. I mean, the In campaign already has a majority in opinion polling, and big business hasn't yet had a chance to deploy its money and its backing. I mean, you saw the effect of that in the Scottish referendum.
yeah,
I mean, people. It sort of sounds quite negative to say that the opinion of big business and the opinion of the money matters, but they sort of have a point. If the people who run like the great companies of the UK, like Tesco's or Tesco's or Lloyd's or what have you, are saying that this will be an economic catastrophe for the UK, well, they probably know because they spend all of their time making up large parts of the UK economy.
exactly. I mean, that echoes a lot of my views about the way the referendum's going to go. I mean, I think the only way No can win it is they have to prove beyond doubt, absolutely beyond doubt, that you'll either be as well off or better off if you leave.
Yeah, and I don't think that's coherently possible.
Yeah,
I don't think they will focus. I don't think they will focus on that though. They will focus on Nigel. For when I say they, I mostly mean Nigel and his party. Will focus on immigration because
massively.
That's what they do.
Yeah, I think they'll feel spurred on by the migrant crisis too, won't they? It's a comfort zone, isn't it? It's their kind of jam roly poly, isn't it? It's the thing they like to.
It's a unique selling point. Is this idea that they are the only party that's willing to and this is quoting what they think, say what needs to be said.
I was just going to say that, it's the no one else will say this. It's that kind of
it
thing,
may not be very politically correct,
but I'm going to say it anyway. Why are they here?
I know from working at a post office.
Yeah, it's funny. In my experience, most of the people who are either a bit UKIP or are UKIP live in really white areas. Like,
that's backed up by the electoral statistics as well.
Yeah, like if you go, how has Islam affected your life? And it's like, well, you don't even know anyone who's Muslim? Yeah, I thought so. I mean, it's crackers. I do find it funny. Like, I don't. There is, to be fair though, there is a bit of the Lib Dems that's quite. There's a certain section that's quite sneery of UKIP or UKIP voters, and I don't like that.
I'm not going to deny that people have concerns and people have legitimate concerns and people. I'm not going to do. I do think that it is a massive mistake when people dismiss everyone and anyone who is worried or who has concerns about immigration as a racist. I think that that's a very foolish and patronizing thing to do, in my opinion.
Yeah, that really pisses me off too, to be honest.
Because if anything, you're not showing respect to the voters. And as a Democrat, first and foremost, my belief is in voters and the electorate and the public as a whole. And if the public say something matters to them, then, well, you should listen to them. Because that is our job. At the end of the day, if we are aspiring politicos, then our job, first and foremost, above all, is to serve the public. And to serve the public, you must listen to them.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, a good example of that is, people quibbling the last election result, where, if you add up the Tory and UKIP vote, you're nearly approaching 50% voting for.
Yeah, and I don't like that. I think you go over 50%, actually. I mean, I don't like that. I want Lib Dems to get 50%.
Yeah, and if you factor in too, Mike, that that I'd say a fair amount of Lib Dem voters don't necessarily class themselves as left wing either. You've got a good amount of people there who didn't vote for
Yeah, if we had PR, we would have a centre-right government. I mean, it's as simple as that, and that's the choice of the public.
Yeah,
Um,
I
the
just
fact
wish
that,
people would represent them more. Or
but well, it gets distorted by first past the post, etc., etc. But,
very true, very true. Which is
I
going to
think
be
like half of this podcast has just been us talking about first past the post.
yeah, yeah. Which is
Could we be any more Lib Demi
I,
than that?
I
Like,
was just going to say it's titled "The Future of Lib Dems," and we just moaned about how we would do well if only everything was how we wanted it to be. Which is like it's a good point, to be honest. It's yeah, it's been interesting though. I mean, I I am trying to figure out where we go in the future, and I mean, I think and you mentioned it at the start, and I didn't really pick up on it. Was with the boundary review. I mean, there's gonna be situations where we're gonna be trying to hold seats that we didn't necessarily think we'd be fighting, isn't there?
what do you mean by? Do you mean like held seats that we
Well,
can?
yeah, sorry, yeah. I mean, in the sense that the seats we have now, when I've
Oh
seen a
yeah,
few
we have.
calculations where we're on less if the boundaries are redrawn.
Well, yeah. I mean, for a start, there's Orkney and Shetlands, which is a marginal between us and the S&P.
Has it
800
has it been
votes.
helped by recent events?
Yes, events which we shall not name. um, Southport, we basically won by luck. Southport, we almost entirely won just because the vote was split in a way that was beneficial to us. Um, so yeah, we'll probably. I mean, Tim Farron's seat is safe. Norfolk's probably safe. Sheffield Hallam could be problematic if we don't get the scale of tactical voting that we got last time.
Yeah, I was
I
going to
don't
say.
know.
I do hope Nick doesn't get knocked out like that. That would be awful, to be honest. But
Like I made, I was willing to say, I was on the radio, the night of polling night, and I said I am willing to make two bets about this election. One, Nigel Farage won't win his seat, and two, Nick Clegg will win his. And at least I got those right. I got everything else that I said that I wasn't willing to commit myself, but I did think wrong. But the thing I was willing to commit myself to, I did get right. So
well, you weren't eating your hat then, which was
no,
quite good
well,
to see.
well, my prediction of the number of seats we'd got would 38. So I would have eaten my hat if I'd have said
Jesus.
it.
Yeah, no, I mean, to be fair, you did what I did. I just went, oh, all those Tory Lib Dem seats, they'll be locked in. It was
Yeah,
like,
I know. Uh, oh God, don't make me relive it.
yeah, I remember telling people that for like months before and going, oh, it's fine, don't worry.
Yeah, we won't lose the Southwest. What ridiculous idea. Yeah, okay.
But that's the irony now, as much as kind of, what we call the left hate the Lib Dems now, it, if you talk pragmatically about how do we remove Conservatives from having a majority in the UK, the
Oh, yeah,
simplest way of doing that is for the Lib Dems to regain those seats.
yeah, there are 7 seats where Labour voters stopped the Lib Dems getting in. 7. So, that's the Tory majority there. Right there is a Tory majority because of those 7 seats where
Yeah, which is funny because I mean, I do legitimately believe, that people should vote for what, I do understand that people should vote for what they believe in, but the way they moan, I don't understand what was going through their heads. You would have danced with the devil. I think if you thought we were the devil, you would have. I don't understand. I mean, I know first past the post makes people think like this, and I don't like that it makes people think like this. But
oh no, it's not the way. It's not the way we should have to talk about voting at all. But it's the way it is. I mean, it's a bit like the Greens. The Greens are complete electoral dead weight to progressive politics. If you are of the opinion that, because I was at a fringe where Caroline Leakus was there, it was quite a very left Lib Demish fringe. It was done by the SLF and Compass, which was once a Labour think tank, it's now sort of a general progressive think tank. So it was full of quite left-wing people. But if you genuinely think that the Progressive Party should be against the Tories, then you should hate the Greens, because the Greens are electoral dead weight. They only got over 15% in free seats Brighton Pavilion, which of course they have, Norwich South, and Bristol West. Both of those other seats were former Lib Dem seats which went to Labour. Outside of seats which are already going to be run by one of the two other progressive parties, they only act as a spoiler, getting enough of the vote to stop a progressive party from winning, but not enough to actually be anywhere near the realms of competitiveness, because quite frankly, they are unable to get votes from the Tories, from the Tories. Unlike Labour and the Lib Dems. Labour and the Lib Dems, we have Tory Lib Dem marginals, we have Tory Labour marginals. Well, there is no such thing as a Green Tory marginal.
I was just going to say to you, can you ever imagine seeing a setup that talks about Tory Green switches?
Yeah, it doesn't happen because as I said, the only seats where they do well already have overwhelming progressive majorities.
And I don't want to be too harsh, but the Greens' policies are just absolute bollocks.
Oh, don't get me started on the Green Manifesto. Oh, we have pissed off so many. We have pissed off so many people with this. We've pissed off the Nats. We've pissed off the Greens. We've pissed off the UKIPers.
Yeah, I'm going to say I'm pretty much hating on every. I don't like. I guess.
I welcome their hatred.
Yeah, I don't like what I've seen described as these kind of modern political tribes, and I think they are tribes. I think the Corbynistas are tribes. I think the SNP is a tribe. I think the Greens are a tribe. I think UKIP are a tribe. It's just these pies which have just become really strident and weird, and the Greens are just as bad in a way. They're just as bad.
Well, I mean, and then they get convinced to themselves that they will win because they have such committed supporters.
Yeah,
it's the old quote from Michael. It's the old quote from Michael Thursday. Well, there may be a few hundred people in that hall. There may be a few hundred people in that hall who think you're amazing, but there are several thousand outside who think you're completely nuts. And it's confusing measures of enthusiasm for measures of support, because the vast majority of people don't care particularly. They may vote, a majority of people vote, but they don't particularly care about politics. They don't particularly pay that much attention.
And you know what?
They're not party members. I mean, party membership in the UK is 1% of the electorate. 1%.
Yeah, so it's not a normal thing to do, is it? Really?
Party members are, by definition, abnormal, and generally speaking, they are an exaggeration of their party's voters.
Yeah.
And you need to be self-aware about that, because if you are not self-aware about that, you will go down a rabbit hole where you make yourself feel good. You pursue policies which are like really, really strongly liberal, or really, really strongly green, or really, really strongly socialist, and then the average member of the public, the 99% of people who aren't member of a political party, look at your incredibly idealistic, completely unrealistic manifesto and go, bloody hell, I'm not voting for you. You're barking mad.
Well, funnily enough, I think what was once a mainstream party is now conducting a real-life thought experiment on that very thing. So we will have the best example ever of how that goes. But I'd say it's interesting because I mentioned my previous podcast with Robbie, to move on to Corbyn a little bit. I did say, if I was like, so say you have the full left-wing shebang and it bombs completely. Are Corbyn supporters willing to like hold their hands up and go, yeah, it's wrong. We can't do this. It doesn't work. People don't want it. And I actually thought that might happen, but I don't think it will now. I just think it's going to be, the mainstream media and the moderate Labour MPs lost it for us. We'd have done it if they'd have been on side.
Oh yeah, definitely. That's what always happens, isn't it?
Yeah, which is
it's when it gets and I think where I saw this most was with one of my former tutors when I was at college. He was a smart man. He's quite old, but a really dedicated Trotskyist. And
as you do.
I think, well, he was a smart man. He'd thought a lot about politics. He was great fun to argue with. I did argue with him a lot because it's not Trotskyism isn't my tradition.
Hey, there's an interesting thing though. If you look back at people in New Labour who started off as like Trotskyists and then became like,
David Blunkett, for example.
Yeah, I think was Mandelson even in the Trots?
Yeah, Mandelson. Yeah,
John
Mandelson made a
Reed.
point.
John
Yeah,
Reed was one as well. I think
yeah.
there's a few of them.
Anyway, but it felt when I was arguing with him that he had been of this persuasion for so long and so vehemently that it became part of his identity. And that's when it gets worrying, because that's when it
Yeah.
becomes part of your fundamental identity. Then reason doesn't really work.
I'll tell you what I've found really funny. Do you watch Game of Thrones?
No, I don't. I need to,
Oh,
but I don't.
you've never stayed my reference. There's a very pious character called the High Sparrow, which was basically he's an old bloke who's like kind of running a religious inquisition, and yeah, there's a lot of Twitter kind of tweets kind of mocking Corbyn, calling him High Sparrow, which I quite liked. I thought it was a good parallel to draw. Interesting on the Greens though. I mean, the Greens are like a battered kind of old wife now of the left, aren't they? In the sense that I'm going to really piss them off with that, but like they, you know,
Misogynist.
yeah, I know, God, I've triggered someone there, but they, all the left kind of wing of Labour kind of left Labour, a fair amount of them left Labour for the Greens, and then as soon as Labour's come back to being what they want, they've just gone, well, fuck you to the Greens, and just
Well,
left them.
this is the problem with the Greens, is that the Greens don't they don't care about at this election. They did not fight as a Green party. They
Yeah, they
did not
fought as a
fight.
left of Labour party, didn't
Yeah,
they?
they fought as a socialist party, and the problem with that is, and it would have been a problem for us if we hadn't have had the Orange Book and Ming Campbell and Nick Clegg. Oh, sorry.
You okay?
Moving back to the centre. Yeah, just coughing up my guts. Moving back to the centre. Is that it sort of makes you subject to the whims of the Labour Party? And becoming a purely socialist party with barely any mention of environmentalism. I mean, I remember the debate, Natalie Bennett in the debate. I don't think she mentioned environmentalism. She mentioned environmentalism, I think, twice in the entire thing.
She's really
The,
proud when she's on the radio now saying, I'm the only one who mentioned climate change. That's like
yeah.
a big thing.
What's the point of you now? What's the point of the Green Party? What is not really a Green Party anymore, but a socialist party, when a much larger, much more powerful, much better funded, much more members, much more MPs, etc. party exists that is socialist. What is the point? And I think it's going to crush them. I think that was one of the first predictions I made when Corbyn won, was that, well, way before Corbyn won actually, was that it would be awful for the Greens. They'd be back down in 0.5% territory.
Yeah. Oh, I agree. I don't know what the Greens do now.
Oh. Well, if they were smart, I mean, the Greens have a division between the mangoes and the watermelons. Between the that comes from the ideas that mangoes are yellow on the inside, green on the outside. They're like liberal environmentalists, and watermelons are red on the inside and green on the outside. They're socialist environmentalists. I think if the Greens were smart and if they were led by someone who was competent,
They become mangoes.
They would basically try and occupy our space. They would try and displace us. They would try and use new members. They would make a shift towards being a more liberal environmentalist party. I don't think that will happen, because I think they've gone too far down the rabbit hole. They have too many members who are of the purely socialist persuasion, and don't who particularly care about environmentalism.
Well, that's it. I mean, you're speaking about this in terms of things like strategy and pragmatism, which I don't think a lot of Greens really give a fuck about, to be honest.
Well, yeah, and I think the end result of that is they're going to be crushed under Corbyn's tank treads. That will be Corbyn's great achievement. I mean, I'm not gonna criticize.
I was going to say that's the one thing.
That is the one thing Corbyn will do, is attract votes back from the Greens and practically crush them, which is probably quite good for the Lib Dems as it happens, because one less competitor to that sort of like liberal inclined graduate stroke student voter. It's probably quite good for us. We could probably thank Corbyn for crushing.
I mean, there's a future where Corbyn looks on in horror as the obituaries for him in part say that he managed to single-handedly destroy environmental politics in the UK, which I don't think he would ever set out to do, but he's probably going to end up doing in a way.
I mean, Well, you know how it is. Well, I can't. Politics is beyond the point where it makes sense.
Yeah, it's flipping interesting though, and that's
Oh, it's
like
fascinating. It's nuts. If you'd have 2009, if you'd have told me, I was quite into politics at that point. Maybe not quite where I am now, but I was quite into politics. If you'd have told me that all of this would happen, I'd have gone, "Don't be silly." But no. It's we are at the point of completely uncharted territory, and uh,
good.
it's interesting. It's probably going to be bad. I will point out. I will add a caveat here. Interesting as is, it will probably be bad for the country. But for the country as a
That's a
whole,
very valid point. Yeah.
for the country as a whole, it's good to have a credible, powerful, um, uh, a strong opposition. I don't think we're going to have that for the next 10 years. Let's be honest. And the sort of disputes that we had in the 1970s were awful for the country as a whole. And the 1980s as well, like the miners' strike and such. Oh, yeah, and that's another thing. The militancy of the trade unions is another thing that's going to build up and make the next 10 years more interesting. And the 70s and the 80s for people interested in politics were completely fascinating, but they were bad for the country.
They were
really bad for the country.
Time to live as well. It wasn't.
Yeah, it was
great.
not pleasant. It's not a pleasant. It's not a pleasant place to live in a country where your politics is interesting. In all honesty, what you want is for politics to be really boring and everything to be working like clockwork.
There's a good. I tell you what, I remember from high school there was a good assembly the head teacher gave. Where there was this old Chinese proverb of what was it? May you never live in interesting times, which is it's always stuck with me. Actually, I don't know why I remember it, but I think it's so true. And I was having this conversation with someone recently. I was saying exactly what you said. You want your politics to be boring. Stable countries have boring politics. Greece has fascinating politics. The Greek politics is absolutely interesting. I don't want that though. I want it to be boring compared to
yeah. Greek politics is fascinating, and they have a fascist party coming third in their election.
Exactly. Yeah,
American politics is fascinating, and they have their government shutdown. Canadian politics is interesting, but it's interesting in a sort of boring. Canadian politics is like the optimal, where it's interesting, but it's interesting in a sort of way that isn't. It's a bit boring as well. I don't described it very well, but I've been watching the Canadian election with a lot of interest. I really want the Liberals to come first.
It's something I've read a few articles on, but I haven't really touched into it. I don't know what it is about Canadian politics, which I just decide to ignore. It sounds bad, but...
Well, it's the fact that if you're interested in sort of like standard sort of extreme drama, then Canadian politics doesn't really provide it. Everyone's quite soft spoken and.
Nice. Canadians are very friendly, though. They are good people.
Well, what's interesting? Another interesting thing about it is that they mention Britain all the time. Like they use parallels in British politics all the time, whereas we pay a lot of attention to American politics and completely ignore Canada, and America completely ignores us. But Canada has a lot of references to us, and I find it quite flattering. But alas, everyone here cares about America, which I don't personally care about that much, to be honest. But
yeah. Well, I guess we're cashing in our Commonwealth kudos there and getting all the references, which is nice. I like Australian politics. That's interesting.
Australian politics. I mean, Australian politics is. I think if I was there, I'd just crawl into a ball and cry.
It's so brutal as well.
It's really brutal, but there is no political party or political leader that I can think of in Australian politics over the past 10 years who I agree with.
That's a fair point. Yeah, it's one way or the other, isn't it?
So if I was there, I think I would just crawl into a ball and cry about how I wish there was an actual Liberal Party rather than a party that calls itself Liberal but is actually pretty much UKIP.
I mean, Abbott before he got deposed was just crackers. I mean, did you
Oh,
see?
Abbott was awful. Gillard was awful. I mean,
There's two videos of Abbott which I found really weird. There was one of him where he was just necking a pint, and it was just like he just walked into this bar, and I don't think anyone even said to him down the pint. He just downed it, like as if like to show off to cameramen when you're the prime minister. And I was like, okay. And then the other one was when he,
in eating an onion.
yeah, I was gonna say, yeah, the onion when he just bit into a raw onion. I was like, are you like that's just mental? That's just like the weirdest thing ever. I don't know. I genuinely this sounds so like trivial, but I don't know how you can be the leader of a mainstream economy and eat raw onions like that. I don't think it should be. I don't know how you can run a country when you do that. It's just mental.
Well, you should just be banned. You should be
I
banned
think,
from eating.
I
The requirement for high office in a major economy, you should be banned from eating onion.
there should be the vetting process, and I don't necessarily care about people singing the national anthem, but you know, if they say to you, and question 3, would you eat a raw onion whole out of your hand? And you go, no. You go, yes. You're like, well, you can't serve. Sorry. It's like that's just weird. What you're doing. He's just a strange person, and I'm not surprised he's got. He annoyed me on gay marriage as well. Really, really annoyed me on that. I didn't understand his stance on that. That was strange.
Yeah, Australian politics is just a bit depressing.
Yeah, which that is a very interesting. Just as another issue. Not to drag on too long, Mike, but just another issue. Because I know you said you like Northern Irish politics, and the whole gay marriage thing there is quite interesting. And I hope the Lib Dems. I know we don't stand there, but I hope we have a good, firm response on that.
Oh, I think it's a disgrace that there's still part of the UK in this day and age where abortion isn't legal, where same-sex marriage isn't legal, where basically it is where it was before, Roy Jenkins. Oh no, I think it's disgraceful that there's UK territory where that's the case completely.
That said, though,
really anything we can do.
I do think Sinn Féin kind of use the clothes of progressivism to kind of, I don't know, I'm very cynical about it.
Basically, every party there is socially conservative, except half of Alliance, and even then only half. The DUP, massively socially conservative. Basically, you get the UUP, socially conservative. Sinn Féin, socially conservative. The SDLP, pretty socially conservative still. They're not as bad as the others. And Alliance, about half of it is socially and half socially liberal. So yeah, it's a pretty depressing place in terms of politics in general. I mean, I don't think a political system where ultimately some of the most important issues are flags and anthems and marches, rather than running the education and the healthcare systems decently. That's not a good political system, is it? I mean, that's sort of what's happened in Scotland. What's important to the SNP is, Flower of Scotland and the Saltire, not the efficient running of hospitals and schools. And who suffers there? The people do.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Scottish politics is so frustrating. There's a big chip on the shoulder up there. I'm going to get in trouble again by Nats for saying that, but what I don't get is it's the best represented part of the UK. It's got the best representation. It has MSPs and MPs, and they still just moan. Like they do, don't they?
And massive amounts of funding. That's got to be said.
Yeah, if you, I use the Yorkshire analogy in part in jest and in part in seriousness. If you start giving Yorkshire the same population its own MYPs
MYP is problematic. MYP is problematic because there's a youth parliament which uses MYP. So
fair enough.
So we need to come up with a different thing, or we need to just force the youth parliament to change its name.
We'll force them for now, but no other area of comparable size has as much representation or money thrown at it, and all you hear is negativity.
It's quite funny. It's like the string of people who are pissed off. The Welsh are really envious of the amount of money that the Scots get, and we're quite envious of the amount of the money the Welsh get, and then the North East the northeast region, like around Newcastle, and that is really envious of the amount of money we get. So it's just like this chain of people getting pissed off.
Yeah, the SNP have just destabilised the entire thing, really, and they're just pitted everyone against each other, which really winds me up. Right. Anyway, Mike. Right. To sum up, I mean, what? Go on. Give me a few points to sum up in terms of the future Lib Dems. Where I mean, if we had to cap this, I mean, if someone is crazy enough to listen to a couple of hours of us ranting on about the Greens and Corbyn and the SNP,
and first past the post,
and first past the post,
the most important thing to the Lib Dems of all.
what should they take away in terms of the future Lib Dems? What should they be taking away?
Am I talking to liberals here?
Let's say you're talking to liberals and you're talking to non-liberals. So kind of a couple
if
for
you
each.
are a liberal, I'm going to quote Tim Farron. If you are a liberal, then join us, because I will tell you what is ahead of us. It is a long, hard slog of local elections, of European elections, and the SM parliamentary elections, where frankly we will need to knock on doors and we will need to talk to people and we will need to persuade them with the liberal case. Because I agree with Paddy Ashdown. Paddy Ashdown has always said that fundamentally this is a liberal country. I also think that fundamentally this is a liberal country, and the parties which have always won elections in the past has generally been the parties which have been the more liberal out of the two illiberal parties. So that's why we will be back, is because this is a liberal country. What we need now is we need members and we need activists, and we need to be going down knocking on doors. We need to be putting leaflets through letterboxes. We need to be talking. We need to be persuading. We need to be making our case in an effective way, and we need to be winning again. And that's what matters, is winning again and using those wins to change people's lives and building upon that, just as we've done before, as we did in the 90s, as we did in the 70s, as we did in the 60s, we did in the agreements, we did in Jeremy Forbes, we did under Paddy Ashdown, and just building up, because it will be a long, hard slog, and it will be a enjoyable slog, I hope. One with many victories ahead of us.
I like that. That's I think that's spot on. What about non-liberals? What would you say to non-liberals, or at least people who, are people who come from a liberal country, as we say, but aren't necessarily going to vote Lib Dem? What can they take away?
Well, firstly, vote Lib Dem.
Fair one.
Secondly, be very cautious of people promising you the earth. I mean, that first and foremost. And be very cautious in particular of the demagogues, of anyone who who can go on long and brilliant rants about how this particular thing is evil, be that immigrants or the English or whatever, and take an active interest in politics. Definitely become a member of a political party, even if it isn't Lib Dems. Being a member of the voting itself does not actually give you very much power at all. I mean, unless you're in like a super marginal, your individual vote probably isn't going to have that much of a consequence on politics. But being a member of a party, you really can. You'd be surprised.
Yeah.
So certainly do become a member of a political party, and try and make the country better. Be naive like that and think you can change the world.
Yeah, no, I really second that. I mean, I joined this summer and I found it quite an interesting experience so far. I think I've met some pretty good people, and yeah, I don't know, I like it. I think as long as you take a long-term view and you don't think you're going to change the world by giving a few pounds to something, you can, I think you can get a lot out of it.
And if nothing else, you get to complain directly to people rather than just complaining to your family around the dinner table, and
Well, that's true. That's very true. Well, anyway, Mike, thanks a lot for doing this. I did think you'd be quite busy this week, but I do really appreciate that you wanted to do this.
No problem. It's been a great pleasure.
I mean, hopefully people tend to listen to it afterwards. Well, that happened with the first one, but hopefully in the longer term, if I do more of these and people,
Hopefully there'll be some great outrage, and then like all of the nationalists and UKIP and everyone will just share it to other people, and they're
yeah,
going to come and post all the comments about how awful we are, but it'll get us views.
I might trend for the first time ever. Lib Dem member says this, but nah, fuck it, it'll be fine. But yeah, I mean, I think you've got a really good kind of insight on Lib Dem. So if you want to speak in the future about liberally things, I'd really appreciate that. That's great.
Well, I'm always happy to. You just need to send me a message.
Awesome. Right. I will. I think we'll stop that broadcast here. But again, thanks, Mike. Really appreciate that. And if anyone has any questions for me or Mike, I will try and put our Twitter, what do we call it? Tag. Well, what is it? What is a Twitter thing? It's
a name. A name.
Yeah, Twitter names. Why am I not understanding the word name? Yeah, I will put our Twitter names in the description box, and you can always ask us a question should you so wish.
Or send us abuse.
or send me abuse, and it's YouTube, so I'll probably get loads of comments and abuse. But there we go. Anyway, right. Cheers, Mike. Thanks again.
Okay, see you all.
See you, mate. Bye.